Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our panel discussion on California's voter registration modernization. I think that for those of you that know about the room change, I think it looks like most of you do, you're in for a great conversation with really leaders across the state who have not only helped to shepherd some of this modernization, but are working every day, and I'm sure it seems for a very long time, to make sure that this is a transition that's empowering for communities in California and that really puts us in a path towards not only having more people participate, but administering on elections in a more efficient and transparent way. So it should be a great conversation. They'll be doing most of the talking. I'm here as a facilitator today, and my name is Efrain Escobedo, Vice President of Civic Engagement and Public Policy with the California Community Foundation. And I'm very honored to share the stage here with my colleagues, whom I will introduce now to get us started. So this afternoon, we have with us John Gardner, who is Assistant Registrar of Voters with Solano County. And John Gardner has improved operations and efficiencies in the Office of the Registrar of Voters in Solano County, including ballot handling, security improvements, countywide deployment of electronic rosters, cross-training staff, increasing office transparency, and implementing online registration processes. Mr. Gardner currently chairs the statewide Vote Count Business Process Committee and is actively involved in modernizing the voter registration system. Mr. Gardner has over 14 years of experience in elections and holds a master's degree in public administration from Norwich University. To his right is Rosalind Gold, Senior Director of Policy Research and Advocacy for the Naleo Educational Fund. Rosalind Gold serves as Senior Director of Policy Research and Advocacy, where she has worked for more than 2 decades on policy analysis and research for the organization's naturalization and Latino civic engagement efforts. Rosalind has extensive policy expertise in the areas of newcomer civic integration, election reform, voting rights, redistricting, and the decennial census. She also serves on the advisory committee and boards of several public affairs and research efforts. Rosalind has delivered testimony before many public and private committees and commission hearings. Rosalind received her JD from Harvard Law School and bachelor's from Pomona College. And we're also pleased to have Ms. Jana Lean, Chief Elections for the Office of the California Secretary of State. As Elections Division Chief in the Secretary of State's office since 2010, Jana Lean has successfully overseen 6 statewide elections and 28 special elections. California loves their special elections. Her experience includes implementation of HAVA Section 102 punch card voting system replacement, transition from a 29-day to a 15-day close of registration, Proposition 34, voluntary expenditure limitations on candidate statement program, and the implementation of the Voting Modernization Board Act and establishment of the Voting Modernization Board. Ms. Lean has also implemented uniform guidelines for the top 2 primary system, created procedures and guidelines to comply with the UOCAVA MOVE Act, and ensured the uniform implementation of online voter registration. And last but not least, to provide us a national perspective on where we fit in with all that's going on here in California is Ms. Tammy Patrick, who's a senior advisor of the Democracy Project at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Tammy Patrick is a senior advisor of the Democracy Project with the Bipartisan Policy Center, focusing on implementation of the recommendations of the Presidential Commission on Election Administration, which she was appointed to by President Obama in 2013. Ms. Patrick was honored to testify in Congress in 2007 on the role of election audits and the U.S. Senate in 2014 on voter registration modernization. She serves on the steering committee for National Voter Registration Day and Board of Advisors for the Center for Technology in Civic Life. So as you can see, we have a stellar set of panelists here today to really share not only their experiences, but also thoughts and perspectives, and more importantly, which is I know why you're all here, to help engage in a dialogue and answer your questions about where is voter registration modernization and other things that are going on currently with its implementation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jana, who will talk a little bit about not just SB 35 when it comes to the new motor voter, but a number of other changes and ongoing projects that are going on related to modernization.
Well, I think the first thing we should start with is a history, because I was asked to do a history by Vince of the VOCAL project and what VOCAL means. So it's our statewide voter registration database. We're finally, after many years of stops and starts, moving along quite well in the project. We had a kickoff in April of 2013, but we're now almost completely deployed to all of the 58 counties. We have 2 counties left to go, and that's Monterey and Stanislaus, which will be coming on board this weekend. And then we'll have all 58 counties online, the voter registration, statewide voter registration system. It's a huge endeavor. It's been a huge partnership with all 58 counties. We know that it is not an easy thing to do. A technology project takes a lot of time and effort. We started, like I said, in 2013 again. We had a failed procurement or a failed registration system development, but we started again, and now we're here. So with the status of that, we are going to move forward with, in the next steps in March, we're going to be doing what we call a mock election of the system. We're going to be running through all the different aspects of the VoteCal system and how it touches the voter registration database with all the 58 counties. And we're going to do some evaluations to figure out if we have any functional gaps in the system, any performance gaps, connectivity gaps, which we hope we don't, and identify any training needs. Because we need to not only just build confidence in our system with our election management system partners and the counties, but ourselves to make sure that we have everything ready to go in place. It's anticipated that this system will become a system of record in June 30th of this year. So it will not be in place for the primary election. I know I get that question a lot, but we're working towards having it fully functional and implemented for the November election. So what does it mean for the voters? So previously, or as it is today, voters in California, if they move from one county to the next, has to re-register to vote. And so they're county voters, not necessarily California voters, state voters. That's one of the big changes that this system will do. It'll allow for, hopefully John will let us know, the easy transmission of the information for each voter to move seamlessly, is what we hope, between each county. And so a person doesn't have to re-register to vote. If we can determine through high confidence matches that the person is the same person from Sacramento County that moves to Solano County. So there's a lot of technology that goes behind that, a lot of testing, and we've been through a whole lot of testing that John has been integrally part of. He was one of the pilot counties who helped to pave the way for all of the other counties to move forward with the system. We started piloting in July of 2015, and we're almost done, which we are way ahead of schedule as far as bringing counties on board, but we still have a long way to go with the remaining of the testing and making sure all the functionality is ready and to be launched. So for the voters, it doesn't just easily move voters from one county to the next. It'll also, once we launch the system in June 30th of this year, a voter will be able to have a lookup tool, and this tool, which is available on a lot of counties' websites, but it's not in a one-stop shop, that allows the voters to go to one place, which will now be the Secretary of State's office, to determine whether or not they're registered to vote. And this is huge. On election day, we definitely get a lot of calls just to figure out if a person is still registered and where they're registered, and where they need to go. So where their polling place is, if they received a vote by mail ballot, was it received back? And then after election, was it counted? And if it was a provisional ballot that they cast at the polls, was that counted? And so this information will now be available to the voters through the voter lookup tool once we have the complete system rolled out by June 30th is what we're anticipating this will happen. We are on schedule and on budget, which is not normal for a technology project in the state of California or anywhere. But we do think it's a success. I know that we have a lot more testing to go with the counties to make sure this is a seamless transition. We are running 2 systems right now, and we will continue to do so. We have what's the existing Cal Voter system. It's our old system where the counties send batch files of information every day. Well, now it'll be a real-time system. So once a person goes on and re-registers or registers online, it'll be automatically transferred to the other county. So, or their registration will be updated immediately. So it's a huge, huge innovation in registration. So we'll be tying into what we call COVER. It's the online voter registration. We'll be doing COVER 3.0 because it will now be taken over by VoteCal. So I see the 5-minute mark. And they asked me to talk about a couple other things. So,
which most of them build on
that's true.
VoteCal, right?
That's
so
true.
Now that you have VoteCal, we can do a lot more things.
We can.
It'd be great to touch on some of those.
And one of the other things that we've worked on in the last year, the Secretary is very ambitious and make sure that we keep our office moving along, which is great. In this last year, the National Voter Registration Act, NVRA, we were able to do some major improvements in helping get social service agencies to report a little bit more accurately and on time. So we completed regional trainings of 5 regional trainings throughout the state of county election officials and reminded them how to go out and train their social service agencies. And through this, we were able to update all of our training material on the Secretary of State's website. And on that website, it has not just training materials for the county elections officials, but also for the social service agencies and anyone else who does the training on how to implement NVRA. So we have seen a huge improvement in the quality of the data that is coming in every month, and it's steadily improving based on these trainings. And more agencies and individual sites are actually being tracked now that before they were more generalized, and we're actually getting it down to the agency level. The accuracy of the reports have been incredibly improved, and we're definitely getting increased participation by the counties. So we don't have to hound them every month for their numbers. We're actually getting them all in. There's more communication between our NVRA agencies, county election officials, and directly with the Secretary of State, and that's what we were trying to do. So the NVRA social service agencies has begun to reach out directly to our office in order to get information, not just training, but to get some paper voter registration forms. We're collaborating, and we're going to continue the collaboration with the Disability Rights of California and UCLA, and not UCLA, it's not funny, ACLU. You look down and I got a little, anyway. ACLU, which have been a great partner, and they're the ones who actually started a lot of this training to the social service agencies. We've been able to build upon that, partner with them, and continue on the training. So in 2015, we were able to increase the growth of the public service agencies registrations by 17%, which is pretty huge. But to build on not just the NVRA at the social service agency, we've also been working with the Department of Motor Vehicles to modernize some aspects of NVRA in their offices. I think most people understand that since 1995, we were in a consent decree with the U.S. Department of Justice. And in part of that consent decree was to help implement NVRA. In that decree, one of the things that was decided upon the Department of Motor Vehicles in order to comply with the NVRA is that they would attach a voter registration form to every application for a driver's license or renewal. Well, I think we can tell by some of the rates that are returned based on that implementation for the last 20 years, there's some improvements that could be made. So in order to improve some compliance with NVRA at the DMV, and by trying to streamline the process through at least a portion of the automation of the process, in the governor's budget for this last year, the Secretary of State's office was awarded some money, and so was the DMV, in order to do some upgrades to their systems. And one is to do a refresh of their driver's license and ID. There's an interface, and also through internet renewals. So there's 2 aspects to this project. We're calling it the DMV Tech Project, which is one of the things we're going to build upon once we get to 1461 implementation. But in the field offices, the driver's license form that people fill out, the application, they will now be asked if they would like to register to vote, not just on that form itself, but that they have an opportunity to do voter preferences at some touchscreen terminals. And at the touchscreen terminals, each voter, as opposed to filling out the voter registration card, they'll be asked if they have a voter preference right on that terminal. the political party preference they choose to do, if they want to be a permanent vote-by-mail voter, and other optional information that's on the voter registration form, such as if they'd like to be a poll worker, if they would like to provide their phone number or email. We're also working with them to upgrade their online renewal system to directly post right into our online voter registration system. It's been a big change. We thought it would be a real kind of easy little thing to have them become a posting entity, but as a government agency, governmental agencies aren't exactly easy to just make changes. So it has taken us quite a long time to get this done. But once they get this anticipated to be complete by April 1st of 2016, they will be now pre-populating anybody who comes in and does a renewal online for their driver's license. They will pre-populate information, their name, their address, their date of birth, their driver's license number, once we get VoCal completely implemented. So I know I'm supposed to stop, but I want a little bit more. AB 1461, I think we've talked about it quite a bit today, and we were told by Department of Motor Vehicles just recently that they anticipate beginning implementation of 1461 by July 1st of 2017.
And can you share for maybe some of the folks who don't know what 1461 does, just one-liner on what that legislation does?
Well, it actually, instead of opting in to register to vote when you renew or get a driver's license, you need to opt out. I think that's the biggest
change.
Biggest change.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Turn over to
All right, so sounds like you guys need some more work to do at the Secretary of State's. A lot of time on your hands.
We have a lot more to do, and it's a presidential election year. Did you know that?
There's always room for more. So now, John, I'm going to invite you. Obviously, Jana mentioned the county several times, a lot of your work. When it comes to implementation, obviously the counties are key and how that actually hits the streets. So I invite you to talk a little bit more, one, about your work on the business process committee for VoCal, but then also what the counties overall have been doing with a lot of this modernization and the implementation for it.
All right, so I'll start just by giving some background on what the Business Process Committee is. We call it the BPC. Really our job is to look at the project, look at the county's business process, and make recommendations back to the state or changes back to the state on how the VoCal system should work. And we also have a role to check to make sure it's actually working correctly and receive feedback from counties as well. So we've been working since 2013. We took the initial design of VoCal from the first round that got presented to all the counties, and they just started compiling a list of questions. You know, how does this work, and what does this mean, and who's going to do this, and I don't think my system can do this. And our committee took that whole list and tried to answer those questions, and we spent months going through with the VoCal designers, with our EMS designers, just trying to find the answer to those questions. And when we couldn't answer the questions, that meant we had to either change a business process at the county or suggest a change request to VoCal. And so far, there's been about 22 of those change requests that we've worked out. And the best part about this, I mean, where this conference kind of comes into play here, is that we've built a great foundation for working with the state and our EMS vendors. So when counties have issues, the state will hear us out, and you don't have to wait for a problem to come up. We can kind of address it through this tool, the Business Process Committee that we have. So we've worked through a lot of those issues ahead of time, but clearly we're not done. I think our committee was really the tool driving the mock election that we're about to do to make sure we test the system so that it works, like Jana was talking about. We had to wait till enough counties were online, so that took a little bit of time, and there's still a couple that are coming on soon. But now that all the counties are online, building out the program for that mock election and having enough time to make changes if there is some problems before an actual election takes place. And through that, we'll also do some performance testing, right? There's a focus group that kind of spun off from our group that, they report back to us that looks at when you do these heavy loads into the system, when you process a lot of vote-by-mail ballots, or when you pull your official list down from the state, is that going to drag the system down into the ground? We know from history that some other states have had problems with that. And let's make sure this doesn't happen in California before we actually get to an election. So that, those are kind of the things leading up to it. My wife said to me the other night, this is going to be great. Your committee work's going to be done. All the counties are VoteCal and life will be good. And I said, well, that's just the start of it. Because once everybody is live and once we go through an election, not only do we have to look at future developments and changes, but who governs the project and who helps prioritize changes that counties are making and enhancements. And now we have this tool in place, so we'll continue with the BPC work to make sure that counties' needs are still heard, enhancements are done to the system properly, and the future projects that we talked about, even something simple like CVR that has been in place for years now, well, that's going to be a change request to VoteCal to make sure that works properly for counties. When we do
Yeah.
Oh, CVR, I'm sorry. That is conditional voter registration or same-day registration, right? The next step towards same-day registration. Thank you. That's been out for a while. I think that goes up January 1st of 2017, right? Elections could start doing that. So in our mock election, we'll have some scenarios that we'll see what needs to change in VoteCal to be able to implement that effectively for counties. Thank you. So, and Jana mentioned this real-time results. And this is true. We're seeing data happen much faster than it did with a batch process. We had a high-profile official pass away in Solano County, and the staff were kind of spreading that around. And the very next day, that death record was processed in the VoteCal system, and our staff pointed that out to show that that was kind of a success by using VoteCal, that happens much quicker. So, well, we're seeing that as a positive, but on the negative, there is some data integrity issues that counties are bringing up to both VoteCal and the BPC that we're still studying. Sometimes a high confidence match that is automatically processed and cancels a voter really isn't. Now, it's a very low number, right? So it's kind of the outlier, but you need to find those and identify what the problem is so we don't have that too often in the future. And then there's the issues when there's close elections. Like I think San Diego just had a recent election that was pretty close, but not all of the changes were in place in VoteCal. So making sure when voters leave a county or come into a county that your official list is accurate is the most important thing to us. So we're studying those things and making changes as we go.
John, in some of the work of the BPC and all of the county input, what would, if you boiled it down to say one or two things, what would you say have been the biggest contributions back towards what VoteCal actually looks like as a result of your work?
Wow, biggest contributions. I mean, there's been a bunch. I mean, we've had to deal with confidential voters in the system. A lot of counties use confidential voters as a shoebox, off to the side kind of program, and now those have to be, per Help America Vote Act requirements, those have to be in the VoteCal system. So we had to put a series of laws in place and change requests in place to make sure confidential voters were going to be protected. And we're still going to evaluate that in the mock election to make sure that that works correctly. Right. But going forward, confidential voters, that was a big push. We spent a lot of time with a concept called blackout periods. For a while, I think we were the blackout period committee. Just months and months of dealing with the fact that election officials, when the registration cutoff took place, you essentially stopped processing voter registration forms. With VoteCal, that doesn't happen anymore. The registration keeps moving, and high confidence matches will continue on. How do you protect your official list from being modified from a change that really doesn't impact that voter's record for the election? Right. And I think we're at a point where we're 98% of the way with changes to make that happen and be successful. Again, we'll test that in the mock election. There might be a little more adjustments, and then we'll provide guidance back to the counties on how that works.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Now on to Rosalind, and I understand you have a few slides to share. So.
Great. Great. Good afternoon. I'm Rosalind Gold with the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials. That's an Aleo Educational Fund. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. The focus of my presentation is going to be best practices and key recommendations for California as it moves forward with the implementation of electronic voter registration. And Jana was talking about the DMV IT tech upgrades. That's part of this. It's also the work that's going to lay the foundation for AB 1461 as we move forward. So in my presentation, I really want to first talk about some of the recommendations we have developed as an organization for how California should implement electronic registration at the DMV and other agencies, and then talk about some emerging issues that are occurring as the process is moving forward. And you're going to hear me use the term electronic voter registration. I want to make sure that folks understand it is not the same thing as what people commonly think of as the concept of automatic registration. If there is time, and if you want to during the Q&A period, ask me about what's the difference between electronic voter registration or the California model of doing things and the Oregon model of automatic registration. I'll be happy to answer that. But right now, I really want to just focus on the concept of how do we use technology to streamline and modernize voter registration at the Department of Motor Vehicles and other agencies. And I also wanted to say that our work has been very well informed by thinking of a large group of policymakers and stakeholders. And you know, the Oscars are what? They're how many days away now? 3 or 4 days away. So I'm going to do this like an Oscar acceptance speech in terms of acknowledging all of the different folks who have been part of this dialogue, because it's been amazingly robust. Secretary of State's office, Assemblymember Lorena Gonzalez, election officials, California Association of Clerks and Election Officials, American Civil Liberties Union, DEMOS, California Common Cause, California Immigrant Policy Center, Project Vote, Disability Rights California, the National Council of La Raza. There may be some other folks, California Voter Foundation, yes, who have all been part of this discussion. So the thinking that you're going to see as I talk is not just from me, like coming up with these ideas. We've had very robust discussions about it. So let's talk about what we've recommended. And by the way, we have a report out there that have these recommendations. What have we recommended in terms of how we should implement electronic voter registration in California? Well, first of all, one of the nice things about doing things electronically, except on rather than on paper, is that people can directly enter information about themselves into a system and look at it and confirm its accuracy, rather than filling out a piece of paper that goes to another employee at the DMV who then goes ahead and puts the information in the system. There are also things that electronic voter registration makes possible to make sure that you have accessibility to people who are not yet fully fluent in English. And any electronic voter registration system should easily and accessibly record what preferences people have for the materials that the language of the materials, the election materials that they get. These systems should be accessible to persons with disabilities. And as the DMV and the SOS moves forward, and they've already started to do this, they should be talking to people who have experiences with language minority communities and persons with disabilities. And you guys saw the LAC was sworn in today, and the VA, the Voter Advisory Accessibility Committee was also present. So those dialogues have started already. So that recommendation is already being implemented. Next, right? In addition, as we implement, this is a big change at the DMV and at other agencies. So staff need to be really trained well, not only on the technology interfaces, but how to provide customer service and how to provide service to customers with special needs. And then, since again we have a new system, the DMV and the Secretary of State should work together to educate registrants and potential registrants about the system. And if it gets adopted at other state agencies or other entities, education should occur at those places. And finally, we think electronic voter registration should be fully implemented into the operations of all appropriate state agencies and any local National Voter Registration Act agencies. So things are just getting started with the DMV tech upgrade. And, how does it match up to our recommendations? Well, oops, that's weird. Okay. Sorry, font issue. couple of things that we're seeing that are raising some issues for us and some concerns. So as Jana had mentioned, right now your initial information that you provide about your eligibility to register to vote when you're at the DMV is still being done on paper. You are filling out on that form that says, I want a driver's license. You're also filling out information about your eligibility to register. So you're not directly entering that information into a computer interface initially. That piece of paper is going to a person at the DMV. And the DMV has ordered 8 million of these forms in the English language. So for some time in the foreseeable future, that paper is going to be the way that people are going to be registering to vote at the DMV for that initial step. We also have some issues regarding the clarity of language on this form, the DL44, regarding attestation and voter registration that we're talking to the DMV about. And then there is a touch screen involved, but it's not until later in the process. So you hand your form over to the DMV that says I'm eligible to vote and I want to register to vote. And then you get a little receipt. And then you eventually take that receipt to a touch screen, and it's not until you get to that touch screen do you say, and here's my party preference, here's the materials that I want, the language I want to get my materials in, some of the other things that Jana mentioned. We are really worried that there is going to be a drop-off between when you give that form to that first station at the DMV and when you finally make your way over the touch screen. And we don't know, and one of the things we're talking about is how do we make sure that people get to that touch screen, or for something as important as language preferences, how do we make sure right up front that we can collect that information? We're working to talk about the clarity and format of the touchscreen interface. We want to make sure all of this is accessible to persons with disabilities. Again, we're starting a dialogue on the training that'll be provided to the Department of Motor Vehicle personnel, and we want to get to the point where we can talk about the plans for the Secretary of State and the DMV to do outreach on the new system. So this is just a dialogue that is just getting started, but we really want to encourage anybody who's interested to let us know. You can let members of the LAC know. You can let by the way, another group I forgot to mention, shame on me, is the Future of California Elections as part of leading the leadership on the dialogue. You can let people at the Future of California Elections know if you want to know how this is going on. There are likely some place between now and when AB 1461 is implemented to be a chance for regulations to be actually promulgated. But if you want to have input into these issues, let any of those folks know, and we will be happy to provide you with updated information. This is an incredible opportunity for California to use technology to really streamline and modernize voter registration, and we hope that this initial phase will eventually turn into one that's much less reliant on paper and much more automated and much more accessible. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind. Now, Tammy, you have some slides as well?
I do.
Awesome.
I do. I think
so hopefully you'll help.
Those who know me would be shocked if I didn't. Yes, please. I'll put it away. They laugh because they know. It's not that many. And you know how fast I go. So good afternoon, everyone. It's really a joy to be here again. And I think what I would like to do is take a look at the California experience in the national context and kind of put it into place. Is this something that's an anomaly, or are many states going through some of these same discussions? And what I wanted to do was give a real brief background to the Presidential Commission on Election Administration. How many of you, this will be the first presidential election in which you're not just, and I say that, just a voter, where you're actually working in your current capacity in a new way in what an election cycle is? So because of that, you've probably found out that you're in a very interesting world where we never live in the present exactly. You might be living to work on the existing election, but you're also looking back at the last presidential election to remember what maybe went wrong, what were opportunities for improvement, and how can that be done by the next election. So in that context, we look back at the 2012 election, and we know that according to survey data, there were about 5 million voters that waited for more than an hour to vote, in some cases 6, 7, 8 hours. And that really is what was the impetus behind the president calling in his State of the Union address in 2013 to have a new commission that was established by executive order. So a couple of months later, the president came out with that executive order, and it laid out 11 different areas that the president wanted the commission to look into. Some of them had to do with voter registration, voting technology, access to information, how are voters being serviced with limited English proficiencies, contingency plans. It's a very big list, and we had 6 months to do it. So he had the commission chaired by Bob Bauer, who was the president's attorney and general counsel at the White House and also his reelection campaign attorney, and Ben Ginsberg, who was Governor Romney's attorney and a very prominent Republican lawyer. And then there were 8 others comprised of 5 election administrators, 3 at the state level and 2 locals, and then 3 business individuals, including Commissioner Brian Britton here was at the time operations manager for that little place called Disney, because they do have lines. And I always have to include Nate Priscilli, who was our research director, and he is now at Stanford. He started out, when the commission started, he was at Columbia, and he moved to Stanford. I'm sure you all know why. So we had meetings all over the country, and we went from Miami to Anchorage, Alaska, in the work of the commission. We went from New York to San Francisco. And when you look at this map, it looks like we probably didn't get very much coverage, but in reality, we spoke to election administrators from all across the country. There were just a couple of states that we didn't have a hands-on touch with, including in our, you knew I was going to do it, Dean. So, so the way that the hearings would go is that we would hear from state and local election officials. I was a local election official in Maricopa County in Arizona at the time of the commission. And so we would hear from election officials what they saw the challenges were in these various areas. And then we'd hear from academics and topical experts. And then we would have an open forum to hear from the voters themselves. And that was always very enlightening. The report is out on our website. It's supportthevoter.gov. And out on that website is a wealth of resources and information on all of the topics in that executive order. And some of it, a lot of it, came from FOS. So you played a prominent role in the report in providing us with excellent information that really made its way into the report itself. So this report, as I see it, kind of had 3 different audiences. We had the legislature for things like online voter registration, allowing for electronic poll books, or funding, perhaps, schools as polling places. For state election officials for some statewide requirements or recommendations that have to do with maybe training. A lot of it has to do with just local administrative efficiencies, data collection, resource allocation tools, that sort of thing. But much of it has to do with the foundation of everything we do, and that's voter registration modernization. So some of our main recommendations had to do with online voter registration, and it was mentioned earlier today, Arizona was the first to offer it in 2002, so it's been around for a while now. And then integration of data transfers within state agencies, and we've been hearing about that quite a bit today, which is really exciting. And then also statewide list comparisons, things like the Kansas cross-check, and then also ERIC, the Election Registration Information Center. So since the report came out, this is the map of the states that have online voter registration, with the darker brownish colored ones being states that added online voter registration after the PCEA report came out. The ones with the kind of green stripes are ones that could very well have it in the next couple of months, hopefully within the next year. And I think it's interesting because states are grappling with ensuring that this new process is accessible for voters with varying abilities and skill sets. It's really critical. Many of them are most likely to pass it if it's tied to the Department of Motor Vehicles or Bureau of Motor Vehicles, but not everyone has a state-issued ID, so how are states overcoming that obstacle? And I think it's critical to remember that online voter registration has passed in every instance as an additional channel to register to vote. It has never been the case where it was taken, anything else was taken away. With the exception of Wisconsin has a bill that once online voter registration is in place, the deputy registrars that they have in place would no longer be necessary, they see in their legislation. So that's one thing. The other thing that we mentioned, it has to do with some of the ability to revisit how the election officials are consuming data from their Department of Motor Vehicles. So the move to, as we've seen here in California and in Oregon, of an automatic registration. Also, we heard about this increased mobility of registration within a state, even if you're crossing county lines. And there are quite a few states that are doing that. The expansion of that Department of Motor Vehicles data sharing with the various NVRA agencies is something that we really pushed in the report. We didn't recommend any additional federal legislation. We said we've got some pretty good laws. Why don't we just enforce them? And when you have training and data collection in these things, you do find better compliance. Another source of the data, and we've heard a little bit about this today from the post office, is the national change of address information. And many states are using that to automatically update information. Particularly Colorado has moved in this state, in this arena, quite a bit. And this is where I give my shameless plug. So with the generous support of the Democracy Fund, the Bipartisan Policy Center, where I am now housed, along with Democracy Works, and Monica Crane-Childers is here, we have a new resource available to election administrators, and it's electionmail.org. This is a repository where you can enter in issues and concerns that you have in all areas of postal interaction, whether it's national change of address, undeliverable return mail, which we know is a trigger for people being moved to inactive. It will report the information directly to the post office at the highest level, to Dan Bentley, who's the election mail liaison for the post office. Nothing gets reported out on the website, but it is going to be a way, once we have this information, we'll be able to identify best practices and push that back out. So end of shameless plug. We also had the two data sharing processes that we mentioned, and the ERIC program also now has the NCOA data set included in it, and that's something that we certainly were really happy to see. So the number of states that have joined ERIC, if I counted their website correctly, was 15 states and DC, and again, the 5 have been added after the PCA report. And we know that this is a critical element for list maintenance, being able to share data both within the state and across the state, and these numbers of their efficiencies will only continue to grow, particularly with Illinois and Pennsylvania being added, because they are very, very large states within that organization. So the PCA report talks about access to registration for voters, list maintenance and efficiencies, and then lastly is the consumption of our voter registration lists. So we know that the use of a more accurate and current voter file is really the end game here. We want to have the voters who are currently in your district, and so we recommended things like online tools to provide information to the voter, electronic poll books to streamline voter check-in, and then a vote center to provide options in when the voters actually cast their vote. So with that, I believe I ended in time, which is another anomaly for me. So I'm happy to sit down. Oh, one thing to mention real briefly is there was a discussion about the, I think he said 8 million paper forms being printed for the Department of Motor Vehicles. In Maricopa County, when I was there, our reduction in printing of our paper forms went down 85% with online voter registration efficiencies as that grew, and we included and increased the amount of online registration that was happening at our Department of Motor Vehicles. So that's a huge saving in addition to all of the other cost savings. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Tammy. I want to ask for thank you and round of applause for our panelists. The last 15 to 20 minutes, allowing our audience to ask questions of our panelists. You can do it one of two ways. And either if you have a specific question for one of the panelists, please ask it and we can have them weigh in. Or if you just have a question in general, and we can try and get perspectives from our different panelists. So I don't know if we have a mic for the audience or not, but maybe we can see by a show of hands who has a question, and we can kick that off. Yes, Kim, you have to speak up.
For all your hard work on VoteCal. I know this has been a long process. And I just have, as you might expect, questions about the lookup tools. I'm wondering, I know VoteCal is close to being done and going live, and you have 2 counties left. At what point do the lookup tools become available? Will we have them available for the primary election, the post-primary season? And will voters learn through VoteCal if their vote by mail ballot was rejected, why it was rejected?
The answer is yes to that, the last question. It will not be made available until June 30th, so it won't be up and running for this election. It'll be in November. I know that we're always looking towards enhancements of the system, as John was talking about, as we go through the first round of elections. I'm sure we're going to have some local elections that they will be used for also, so we can get some ideas of how can we better enhance the system as we move forward. So as part of the mock election, they'll be testing all the pieces and parts that happen that interact with the counties, but we will also be working on the voter lookup tools themselves and finalizing the screens and getting them out for some community review so we can take a look. And I know we've already reached out to a few people to ask if you would take a look at it and go around and see, does this make sense to you? Is this intuitive? So that will be happening. We do have to translate it into all the language, so we know that we have to build in time for that translations and that review. So we do know that VoteCal, once it's launched, is not the final VoteCal. It'll be VoteCal 1.0, and I'm sure we'll go to many .0s after that. But we do need to get the system up and launched in order to make any enhancements.
Great, thank you. Judy. Hello.
This question is for Tammy. You mentioned twice electronic poll books, and I know that's part of, or supposedly part of, the vote centers. The ES&S ones that are suggested failed across the country about 70% of the time. And one of our poll worker inspector guys wants to know how you sign. Do voters sign? And so this is, I know that the NIST EAC folks are now looking at this further, and several legislators have asked for further regulations, but 70% failure rate is scary.
Sure, so that's a good question, and I'm not familiar with the failure rates of any particular vendor. The thing that's interesting about electronic poll books is that there's a wide variety of ways in which electronic poll books have been implemented across the country. So there are many jurisdictions that have created their own in-house. They use laptops, they use their own programmers to develop it. There are others that go with a vendor solution. There are dozens and dozens and dozens. So the way in which you sign varies dramatically. Some have the little electronic pads that capture the signature with a stylus. There are others that have where you can sign it on a tablet. There are a variety of ways that it's done. Now, some will say, but if you're looking at the signature to verify that's the person, I'm not aware of any jurisdiction that goes back into their poll books and does signature comparisons for voters who have voted in person on election day or at an early voting site to do signature comparisons for that particular reason of identity of the individual. They're simply capturing it that that's someone for voting history later on. So the signature validity on that pad, it may not be optimal as a pen on paper, and that's something that I think we are living with all across our lives, whether we're signing our Uber thing or we go into a farmer's market now and the local farmer has a little pad on his and you just sign it there. So I think that the signature is maybe a challenge in some places, but how that signature is being used in an in-person voting situation, it's a less of an evil, I think, than some may perhaps want. Now, the question is whether or not that signature is updating as the official voter signature. So if they choose to then vote by mail and sign an envelope, is that the only signature that's being compared to? Many states have where every voter's signature will populate in their signature verification system so they can see the trends. So the electronic poll books, what we know is that there are also states that have decided we don't like the fact that somebody could create this in their garage and sell it to the local election official. So we're going to have certification of electronic poll books, and there are states that do that now. Indiana is one of them, and they have a uniform process of determining whether or not that is able to be used in their state. So the states are kind of addressing this in a variety of ways. There's a little bit of pushback from local administrators who want to have that flexibility and don't want it to have to be certified because they want to be able to make changes on the fly and be able to integrate new innovations when the technology changes as rapidly as it does.
Do you know, Tammy, in the national or federal landscape, there are sort of at least general guidelines or work that's happening around best practices around that?
Sure. So at the national level, one of the plugs that I will also do, because I'm full of shameless plugs, is IEEE, which is the P1622 project, which is a common data format project that was formerly housed.
If you know what that is,
yeah.
You could call yourself a nerd.
I know,
right?
and I was
You
going
have
to
a little
say what
badge
it
for
was,
that.
but it's pretty geeky. So so that work is looking. It's the industry. I'm going to get it wrong. That's the other reason. Is that it's the industrial, electrical, and electromechanical engineers is what this group is. IEEE. So if you have anything with a plug-in, if you look at it, it's got a little thing on it that says IEEE. They set standards similar to NIST. So that work, that got down in the weeds really fast. So that work is looking at establishing a common data format for all of elections work, whether it's electronic poll books, whether it's election results reporting. And so that commonality of format is really one of the biggest recommendations we can have, because what you have in election administrations, you can buy your tabulation machine from the same vendor that you maybe buy your election management system or your electronic poll books, and they won't talk to each other. You have to create the election individually in these silos. So if we have a common data format, it'll allow things to talk to each other, and it will also allow for election administrators to have the ability to purchase not just an end-to-end system where they have to buy everything from one vendor, but maybe they like this section over here, they like this electronic poll book, or they like this election management system, or they like this central tabulation and this optical scan and this touchscreen, and you'd be able to have what you feel best serves your voters.
Thanks for that. Any other questions? No? Well, maybe since we have a little time, if you'd indulge me, I have a couple of questions. So I think one, it's when we think about California DMV, it's a super large entity, very large organization. And I know we mentioned IT improvement project. Could you share at least one or two of what is it that's entailing? Are they replacing their entire system? Are they working on a current system that they're trying to make better? I think for folks that are not in the weeds on what's going on, it'd be good to know what kind of changes is DMV making to accommodate voter registration modernization.
Okay, so it's not an overhaul of their system. Their system is many years old, even older than our CalVoter system. It's older than a lot of people probably in this room, but they are building upon what they have. What they called was a tech upgrade. They were replacing their signature pads in their in their 174 DMV offices. And when they did that, they also were going to expand technology that they got on those signature pads. It allows for a better image of this is how they've explained it to me. I'm not a tech person, so you're going to have to bear with me. So they're going to also take everyone's thumbprints that come into the DMV, and that thumbprint, that technology, so they're building upon not just this new signature pad that'll potentially give us much better signatures for online voter registration, but also the technology of their the thumbprint, and that thumbprint will be used on what they've just recently have been instituting these touchscreen terminals, and those terminals were used for their tests. So if you had to go in and take a driver's test, that's specifically what they're used for. But in order to leverage off of the technology that they've purchased, they thought that this was a way that they could automate a portion of the voter registration, is how they explained it to us. So what they were going to do is once a person completes the transactions, there's many steps, and I agree with Rosalind, it's a little convoluted, and we're going to have to figure out the best way to get it to work. But once they actually complete all the processes, take their picture, get their thumbprints, they'll go to the touchscreen terminal and they will use their thumbprints. And that thumbprint will actually go back to their system and everything related to their record will be populated. So they'll know based on the thumbprint, they'll say, hello. And they say, hello, Jana, you're here and you wish to register to vote. Now we need you to confirm a couple things and make some selections. And the selections are your voter preferences. So if that's the part that's automated. Now the other part is not automated. It's still the old system. It's on a piece of paper. You have to fill out whether or not you meet eligibility and if you choose to register to vote. So it's only a portion that's being automated, but it's a step. For DMV, this is a huge step. For us, we'd like it to go a little further, but it's incremental, and we're going to build upon that in order to implement the automatic registration.
Great. And just, Rosalind, if you could address, because for me, as I've been following it, hadn't really thought about this second step piece where here's where we just make sure we're going to register you, but now you need to tell us the other details, party affiliation and language preference. Can you tell us a little bit about not just your concerns of that, because I know you shared some of that, but more importantly, what is the default if I just say I don't have time for that and I just walk out?
So, two things. First of all, again, as we had mentioned, in an ideal and optimal world, you would basically, at your very first transaction, when you submit your renewal or your driver's license application, either through a screen, you would, basically have the information come up about your name, your address. You would get questions about your eligibility. You would get questions if you do want to register to vote that would say, what is your party affiliation? What is the language that you want election materials in? Do you want to vote by mail? That all of that would be at that first screen and done as accessibly as possible. But what the default option is right now is if you don't fill out that information, you will get a postcard in the mail that will follow up to ask you about that information, saying, hey, you're registered to vote, but you didn't give us the following information, and please return this. And our concerns about that is that many people we're concerned about are going to basically ignore that postcard, and so there'll be still a big gap in the information we have about what people's language preferences are or what their party affiliation is. If people will give me just a minute to talk about one of the differences between what Oregon is doing and what California is doing, the way Oregon systems work is that when you go to the Department of Motor Vehicles, you have to show some kind of identification or documentation to show that you're authorized to get your driver's license. And if that documentation indicates that you are a U.S. citizen, you will automatically, that's why Oregon is really automatic, you will be pretty much automatically put on the registration rolls, and not until later will you receive a card in the mail that says, oh, by the way, you're registered. If you don't want to be registered, let us know. And Astrid, can you remind me what's the figure that they found out in Oregon about people who are not returning those postcards? Yeah, so Oregon is doing something with respect to the whole registration process where 80% of people are not returning those postcards. We're very concerned that if people don't get to that touch screen to put in information about language preferences, everything else that we're talking about, people are just not going to use that postcard.
But they will be registered to vote. And John, or any other questions that this conversation spurs? Yes. Before I go to Kim, last chance for other folks, so this is probably our last question. No? Going on. Kim.
We just had a briefing about the DMV's implementation on a FOS call last week, I think it was, and we'd heard that they weren't going to replace those signature pads, which concerned me quite a bit because, as you know, we've done all this research on voting by mail, and a lot of the reasons why signatures aren't matching for vote by mail voters is because they're giving them when they register to vote at the DMV on a stylus that's not easy for people to sign, so they don't match. So
they are going to replace
They
them.
are going to replace them.
It's not going to be by the April 1st implementation of this touchscreen terminal, but they are, part of that process is to make sure everything's updated so that they can get the thumbprint in order to continue on with the touchscreen terminal. So they probably will not all be all 174 offices implemented by then, but they're working to try to get it done simultaneously by the April 1st deadline, but they are absolutely replacing those.
Other questions? John, I know we talked a lot about I want to call it the two-step, the voter registration two-step. I'm just wondering, is there any concerns that that's raising for county election officials as you're going to be having to work with this data to then piece together what the voter needs are and how you're going to administer the election?
Yeah, I mean, the common question is going to be, how do you get the rest of that information, and how do you track the voters? Just like when we dealt with underage voters, what new reports do we have to look at? How do we ensure we capture all the data, and how many times do you have to follow up to get that information? And who pays for that?
I see you looking at Janet.
It's anticipated the state will pay for that.
All right. Well, it looks like we're almost at time. Unless there's a pressing question that has come up, then I think I'm going to ask that we again thank our panelists for joining us today. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us. I know we're the session before the opening reception, so thanks for choosing us. All right. Thank you all.